Needless to say, yeah.
And that was 15 years ago?
I was the lead developer on a product called Mac TCP, and many people at Apple didn't know what it was, didn't care what it was, and didn't know how to use it. I guess the world has changed since I last was here.
So that was 15
Can we
years
ask
ago.
how though?
Well, now they use Unix, right? I guess.
And they don't know what it is.
So I'm here to talk to you about email.
Now they care if it doesn't
And
work.
some of the security concerns that go along with opening your networks and your customers' networks to email. Because it isn't secure, and to tell you the truth, it's really under attack, more so now than it ever has been.
Tell me about it.
When I started getting email, no one sent me email. It was a rare occasion when someone sent an email message and saying, wow, cool. That has changed dramatically over the last years, several years. And now, because it's such a ubiquitous communication medium, there are marketing people that insist on sending you email and insist on making sure that you actually got it. So they put these little links in it that point back to their databases and make sure that, oh, look, he actually read that email. Isn't that cool? Then there are the criminals who use email as a conduit to get your money and your resources. We use it for transactional operations. Anyone who's used eBay understands how email is an integrated part of that experience. And without it, it wouldn't be an experience. And you know, sometimes we even use it to communicate with one another because we all have email addresses now, or at least one address. The real challenge is that now that it has become such a ubiquitous communication mechanism, everyone wants to use it. Everyone wants to do things to you that you don't want them to do it to you. And we have to have mechanisms that separate the good stuff from the bad stuff. In general, I think most of us believe that spam and viruses need to be stopped. There are some, depending on the kind of company you work for, it says maybe some of your corporate communication has to be stopped or at least monitored. And moreover, I think the real goal for all of us in this room, including myself, is that we can't let users believe that email isn't a valuable tool anymore. Because what's happened is that they can't use it for their personal communications. They can't trust the communications they get. Because if that happens, a very valuable tool in communicating individual to individual suddenly becomes a really bad tool to do that. And that would be a sin, at least in my eyes. I wanted to go through a little bit, I don't know how many of you are involved in what spam and viruses do and who does it to you. And I want to go just to give you a sense of what is out there today and why it's out there. It used to be that spammers were trying to typically sell you product, but they were legitimately trying to sell you product. It wasn't like the thing they were selling you was something that didn't exist or could cause you harm or anything like that. That's changed dramatically. The spammers are actually also virus writers. They have a symbiotic cooperative relationship. And what they're trying to do is take your money or do you personal harm. They are, so stopping viruses on your networks actually stops those criminals from trying to get access to your information. A long time ago, or maybe a couple years ago, we all saw that spam was coming from places like Romania and Russia and China because there were organized crime organizations doing that to you from those countries. Now you get spam and viruses from all over the world, but typically controlled by organized crime throughout the world. So the Russian mafia is probably the one that's trying to sell you Viagra. And it's not that they will actually even deliver you Viagra, because all they'll do is they'll take your credit card information and use it for some other purposes altogether. So how do they do it? They take They take advantage of vulnerabilities in the systems that you deploy. And they do this within minutes of a vulnerability existing. There was just, I was sitting down here using the wireless network, and there's something on CNET about the latest Windows exploit that happens to be with the Windows Media Player. And they announced an exploit, I think a couple days ago they announced an exploit. There are already tools out there taking advantage of that exploit. Someone's actually written the code.
I would say more often the vulnerability is being exploited before it has been announced. That's the zero-day problem. It's just that they don't actually know that it's being exploited until, oh, gee, that's why those machines fell, because they happen to be vulnerable to this vulnerability that we only just discovered or only just figured out about.
They announced that vulnerability 2 days ago. The virus writers or whoever was writing that exploit probably have been writing it for a month. And it depends who beats you to the punch and actually is able to release that.
Well, it depends on how long it sat in the Roach Motel of the certs.
Right, and things aren't announced, even though they get announced, let's say 2 days ago. They were actually discovered weeks ago, and by some agreement between the vendor and those who have discovered it, they've held on to that announcement until they can actually put out a patch. It turns out Microsoft has a patch for it today. Another example is the recent JPEG vulnerability that was found in Windows. Someone got an email that said, you know, I saw this really piece of damning information about you on the web. Here's the link. I think you should go check it out and maybe do something about it. This is a friend-to-friend email. It was a great social engineering exploit, taking advantage of that exploit that was available in Windows. So people are clever. They know about these vulnerabilities and they take advantage of them. When you take, you guys bring up systems online all the time, right? And you leave the ports open? Of course you don't.
Yeah,
and there's a good, there's some UK organization called HoneyNet did an examination of what happens when you leave an open machine on the internet and how long it takes for the vulnerabilities of the system to get exploited. And within a couple days, the machine was found. They installed a whole bunch of software on that machine. They started to get ready to start using that machine as a mechanism for deploying viruses and spam.
A couple of days? What backwater were they in? Usually it only takes a couple hours. Yeah.
Actually, I know if anyone, if you have a cable modem at home and you bring up a Unix system on a cable modem and it is not protected properly, you will get taken advantage of sooner than you'd imagine.
But it'll
not that bad. If you've got a Windows box, it can go within minutes.
Sure.
Okay, a computer, unlikely.
So, going back to those social engineering tools, I mean, it's amazing the kinds of things that people fall for. And I've seen people do this. I've worked in ISP land where you have all these, innocent users behind cable modems or ADSL modems, and they do things that you just wouldn't believe. I mean, they click on the wrong links, they buy stuff off of people you can't believe, they believe that exe is really in a cornucopia, and if there's a social engineering trick, they will pull it and people will fall for it. I think there's an analyst group called Radicati that did a study about what people do with spam, and the number of people that click on links, that read spam, that buy stuff. I'll have a later statistic, about 10% of the people that get spam buy something from there.
There was a commercial about a year and a half ago that was going around trying to encourage people to think about the security of their environment. It was actually trying to sell antivirus software, but they gave like 4 or 5 examples of somebody doing something really dumb, and they were trying to impress the audience that you should groan and say no, and then not do this, but, and of course buy their software.
People still do it. I think the classic example is the people that buy software from spammers. And you do get a copy of Word or whatever the thing is you're looking for, but you also get your system infected.
The example that's stuck in my mind of one of the people in it was something like, that looked like a really big attachment, so I clicked it.
Generally, over the years, we've presumed that the hit rate for the various ne'er-do-wells was much lower than you just implied. Do you have a reference on that 10% hit rate?
Yeah, it's actually done in a study that Sarah Radicati's they have an
Okay.
analyst group
You
that
have a
actually
reference,
does
we
that.
can get it later maybe.
Yeah, actually, I think I have it in a later slide, the actual reference, or I have it in another slide deck.
Is that the,
Um,
is there a trend up or down on that? Have they
God,
looked
I don't-
over?
You know,
I know that
this
the
is-
trend of amount of losses, and I'll go into that in just a second, is going up. So the number of losses that people see on the network at large is going up. So that would imply that as the network grows, the number of people that have email addresses grows, the volume of this traffic keeps on going up. You know, not everyone has email today, and new people get email addresses every day, and those people are ripe for falling for a lot of these ploys. You know, they're your parents, they're your grandparents who are suddenly getting excited about the internet, and they get excited about the internet, they get an email address, they start communicating, and the minute they start communicating, they start getting these solicitations.
And don't forget to go the other way. Think younger, kids.
And that's,
Teenagers and preteens, they're getting email addresses so they can chat with their friends, and they don't know any better at all.
yeah, there was a virus announced today, the first Mac OS virus, which was an iChat-based virus.
Worm.
I'm finding myself cleaning up a lot of friends' machines. And what happens is their kids get an email address, you know, one of these Hotmail addresses or something. And so the kids start chatting, they start downloading games, and the next thing they knew, the family computer is clobbered, and people are willing to buy me dinner in return for cleaning up their machine and reading their kid the Riot Act. One other thought, and that is, there are some of us who might be considered to be Luddites. Not a week goes by that I don't get criticized for the fact that I don't use a GUI-based mail client. I still use Elm. I've been using it since 1989, and I still use it. And you know what? I have never gotten a virus from using Elm. And I take one look at the mail header, and this thing is supposedly from eBay, and I look up at the top and I go, that's not an eBay address. Delete. And these people that with the GUI-based email who think that they're bleeding edge.
So I'm just gonna jump in here. So we should let him keep going because I bet his talk is a great talk, and I want to hear it.
So
we do have another speaker this evening.
one comment about email readers. There are good email readers out there that actually protect your end user. They don't do the header expansion that you really want them to, and show the horrible stuff to you. But there's other mechanisms to keep your users protected, and I'll go into some of them as I go through.
Okay.
Just one more comment. We do have another speaker, and so we do want to make it in time to have that pizza and beer.
Maybe we should hold questions and comments till the end.
So, a couple other things is that, and I think I've said it here, they install rootkits, they get you involved in a botnet. I bet everyone here knows what a botnet is, right? A botnet is a collection of PCs that's under the control of some guy in Romania that is used to send out viruses, to send out spam, to do denial of service attacks against websites.
If this is really coming from offshore, how come we had such a plunge in spam when the hurricane hit Florida?
Well, there is the Florida connection, and whatever it is, it could be the Colombian cartel that's like figured out that there's better internet access in Florida than anywhere else in the world. But these guys are out there to do a couple things. They're out there to steal your money. Actually, they're out there to steal your money, period. They use those compromised sites to continue their attack and their attack campaigns. So they grab a botnet and they go out and they start attacking other systems, and it's truly a virus. What's worst about this is, can you imagine all this? Can you imagine the site that I now have 100,000 infected PCs, but I haven't used them yet, and I'm waiting for that moment where I can go out and conquer the world. I mean, the other thing that one of the things that MirrorPoint is looking at is you look at Windows Mobile, Palm OS, and the number of devices that now have not only access to the internet, but they also have access to a cell phone network. And it hasn't happened yet, but you can imagine that if a lot of those systems are infected, you can go out and now take down a whole telephony network.
They also have access to your phone book.
Yeah, well, who found that out? Was some movie star in Hollywood? Well, I think I've gone into why they do it. They do it because of money. They do it because last year, this company called CyberSource, who's a credit card processing company, estimated that $2.8 billion was misappropriated from individuals. And the way they do that is they look at when you get a chargebacks. So when, I didn't buy that PC last month, and that happens a chargeback in your credit card processing. So those chargebacks end up in about $2.8 billion worth of e-commerce losses. Question?
No, I'm just,
Oh. So enough of the problem. What do you do? As an email administrator, as someone who runs a network, what can you do? You gotta implement controls at the edge of your network that block viruses and spam. Specifically, it's really important to block viruses. I'll go into some of the techniques you can use to block viruses. You gotta keep spam and phishing out of the user's inbox, because users are dumb. I gave a talk at Interop, and I used that term, users are dumb. And everyone in the audience said, yeah, we know that, users are dumb. And they're dumb because that 10% of users that's gonna buy something out of your spam message. Control outbound behavior as well. Regardless of how careful you are, someone's gonna get affected on your network. And someone is gonna start sending out port 25 traffic when they're not supposed to. Those are viruses on their system that are out there becoming a spammer. They're part of a botnet. They're trying to send stuff on behalf of the company that you work for.
they're trying to join the board.
And once they do that, you get subject to RBL lists, you get subject to other retributions by other sites. So it's really important to control port 25 traffic. Not only that, but the other thing is they could just use your mail server as a jumping point. So it's not only control port 25 traffic, but also control the type of behavior you see in email, number of messages you see going out from a particular host. Because you really don't send a message a second. I don't care who you are, you don't send a message a second. No, you don't send a message a second.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. More.
The other thing that's increasingly becoming an issue is beware of regulatory compliance needs that you are subject to. And I'll go into a little bit more about what those are. Antivirus best practices. It used to be that it was good enough to run an AV engine on the edge or an AV engine in your Exchange or whatever mail system you were using, and that was enough. It's no longer enough. Viruses and the number of outbreaks we see on a daily basis mean that you have to run something in addition to that standard signature-based engine. If you look at, there's a bunch of companies in the neighborhood around here. I think there's one called Trend, another called Symantec, another one called McAfee, that do AV products. They're not sufficient. The US AV companies have done a really poor job at protecting your customers' computers against viruses. They take days to come out with a new signature pattern against an emerging virus. And in those days that they're waiting to release that pattern, systems are getting infected.
So what about Clam AV?
Clam AV is better by a long shot. The one issue I have with Clam AV is that it's not fully protected against known viruses. They do really well in the emerging viruses. If I know you're running Clam AV, I just go back into my old file cabinet, pull out some virus that's 5 years old, and send it to you. Because Clam AV typically doesn't cover those.
Shouldn't you have replaced your apps so that the 5-year-old virus won't work anymore anyway?
Windows is really good at running old applications. And viruses that get through also are not always observed, because the people that you're responsible for managing their systems don't always notice that they have a virus. And worse yet, the kind of viruses that can be targeted to a specific organization are the kinds of things that may just stay in the background, waiting to do something. They're installing a rootkit, looking for that time when you enter your credit card information, so they can grab it and send it off to someone. So they're not there to do malicious harm today, they're there to wait to do malicious harm tomorrow. A little bit about the life cycle of a virus. So an outbreak begins, and we don't know when it begins. Just like the way we don't know when an exploit is actually being exploited, we don't know when those viruses begin. They could start in a very low background mechanism, so they're probing networks trying to figure out whether that exploit works. Eventually, people detect the virus. There's companies like Message Labs is actually a good example of people that detect viruses. They see a large volume of email, they look at the patterns associated with those viruses, and they actually do a detection. The problem is that could be hours or not even days after the first outbreak happens. So as I said, the peak happens, and then you start getting signatures. Symantec, Trend, these guys, they're out here. You got people like, there's Bitdefender and Kaspersky that are way in here. They're a Russian company, a Romanian company. But then there's folks like a UK company called Sophos and a Finnish company called F-Secure that do a good job at protecting viruses ahead of when all the other people have signatures available. One of the things you should do when you do think about rolling out a new virus product in your network is make sure that you're picking someone that does the early detection of signatures, early distribution of signatures, early detection, early distribution of signatures. And today we think that you really need to have a day zero protection. Day zero protections are protections that they don't care what the signature of the virus is. What they care about is the behavior of the system. So there's a bunch of techniques out there. There's a company called Avinti that actually opens up the attachment in a Windows VM and looks at the behavior of that virus in the Windows VM. Really expensive solution, but if you're really paranoid, probably a cool way to do things. If you're really, really paranoid, you go to the Microsoft website and look, they have a knowledge base article that goes through the 31 extension types that can be executed on a Windows platform. If you just quarantine those 31 extension types, you won't get a virus. Or you probably won't get a virus.
You will, but you'll get 400 copies of it in your quarantine.
Which is better than getting 400 copies on people's desktops. There are also, like MirrorPoint, we sell a day zero technique that looks at messages in the world at large and actually can see those patterns of virus behavior and virus dissemination happening in the world at large. Viruses don't come from one place, they come from these botnets that are all over the world. So you'll see IP addresses starting to send the same type of attachment over and over again. So what we do is we collect all that information, all those messages from throughout the world, and can look at those patterns and look at things that look like viruses. That's another technique for day zero protections. So it's really important if you're moving forward and starting to make decisions as to what kind of virus mechanisms you're putting in place. Look at day zero, make sure you have something on the edge that's different than what you have in your network so you get that differentiated protection. Fine, put Symantec on your desktops. Put something else in your gateway. Okay. Spam controls. People don't listen to you. Your users don't listen to you. But by all means, work on some best practices that you can put in front of people. At least try to educate them. Show them samples of what spam looks like. Show them that this message that tries to sell you some great product really isn't selling you a great product. Try to impress upon them the evils of these criminals that are trying to attack them. That level of user communication might stop them from clicking, which is really hard. They really want to click there. Publishing email addresses, clicking on links in messages, HTML, as the gentleman said earlier, he used Elm, I think, that he doesn't like to look at images and HTML messages. A lot of marketing organizations use those image links to go find out that you're a you're actually reading their message. There's spammers that use those links to get a valid email address so they know how to attack it further. Lastly, keeping spam out of the inbox. A lot of systems, oh, I deliver it to the Exchange junk mail folder. That's not sufficient. You really need to keep it at least a click away from the user. Put it in a quarantine off your messaging infrastructure. That maybe you send them a digest message that shows the messages that you captured for them. Delete it if you feel that's even warranted. But keeping it a click or two away from the user, make sure that they don't click on phishing messages, make sure that they don't try to buy something because it's that much harder. And if it's that much harder, it's not sitting in front of them on their laptop in their inbox with a word that said spam on it. That's when they see that, they go, oh, it must be a false positive. My bank really does want me to update my account information. If you keep that someplace else where all they're doing is getting a link that says, these are all the messages I thought were spam or phishing attacks, and I put them somewhere else and scroll off, and they have to go and click on something to download it. It makes it harder for them to actually take advantage of that. They don't inadvertently, in their copious spare time, click on the stuff. And remember, that's 10% of the users actually buy stuff. So they don't care what you tell them. They eventually will go and try to buy stuff. So keep it out of their inbox. One of the things we found is that a lot of the spam detection technology that's out there actually tells that stuff is really spam. We have customers that just drop everything that says it's confirmed spam. And they don't get complaints from their users because it really is spam that you're deleting. So that's another approach you can take, is just get rid of the stuff. Phishing controls. This is really hard. I'm not going to kid you. It's really hard to stop phishing.
What's the distinction between spear phishing and just phishing?
So spear phishing is when let's say your CEO sends you a message that says, all employees need to follow the following procedures. Please click here to go to the site that will walk you through the new information that you need to enter. If I sent that through an organization, how many people would actually follow the rules of the CEO? That's a spear phishing message. It's targeted to a specific organization coming from someone in the organization that they trust. So
it's never been allowed through your outer.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that one of the things you have to do is develop techniques that actually stop those messages from getting into your network. And it's really simple. Some of the things you can do is, first of all, don't allow someone from outside your network to send something on your behalf unless they've done an SMTP auth or
if it claims
connection.
to be from inside my organization, then it should not be coming from an external interface.
Yeah, but you have people at home that want to send email, so make sure
you have to come through the VPN. But
VPN or SMTP auth or something like that. A lot of people don't do those things, and they let anyone send messages on their behalf through their outbound gateway. Okay.
I see a lot of these things that say, blah, 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 do this really important clicky thing. Thanks, the so-and-so support team.
Right.
If they thought that came from their ISP, they might, a bunch of these dorks are going to do it. Of course,
if
that's
you
not
think
how
about
MySpace is
there's actually a
administered.
good example of an Israeli company that got spearphished. Someone went dumpster diving into their bins. They found out a bunch of information about the corporation. Leadership charts, who was who, and they start doing these attacks against someone. You're dead. I mean, I'm sorry, you're going to be taken out like that. There's a couple new technologies that are coming out. SPF is something that's been about 1.5 years old, really doesn't do a good job at what it's trying to do. There's some new stuff, domain keys from Yahoo, and a new technology called DKIT, domain keys identified message mail from Yahoo and Cisco, which does cryptographic signatures on a header, and it does a good job at stopping those spear phishing attacks. So that's sort of where the world is going as far as phishing goes. Microsoft is actually listening, and they're doing stuff to build stuff into their browser controls. You're going to see with the next version of IE that they're doing things to stop phishing attacks and detect when you're actually seeing a phishing attack, and be able to put up a warning in front of the user saying, this site is not what it says it is.
And of course, Firefox has been doing that for about 1 year,
Yeah.
so that's already in released and everything.
Personally, if I were an admin, I'd just deploy Firefox on all my network. Of course, then when it gets 90% share, everyone will be targeting that one. Outbound, as I was saying, outbound behavior. A lot of viruses use port 25 to send out messages. It's just an easy way to get messages injected into the internet at large, and they're bypassing your local servers. So blocking port 25 traffic goes a long way to defending against a lot of the viruses that are in your network. The other way you can do it is not just block, but redirect it through your mail hosts, and then put the spam and virus controls on the mail host to track that stuff. The other thing is port 85 and the message submission port that a lot of your employers are going to say, well, I want to send you email, I'm at home, you're not doing this VPN thing. You know, there's this message submission port 587, that a lot of the ISPs are now blocking port 25 traffic, redirecting it through their servers. So to get around that, you do port 587 with things like SMTP off or APOP enabled. So you actually know that it's an authorized person with some sort of, you know, maybe some two-factor authentication, maybe. No, maybe not. We're not there yet.
Maybe you're not.
Implement acceptable use policies. For those of you that are in ISP land, this is exceptional, something you really have to follow. Put acceptable use policies in front of your customers. So I used to work at an ISP, now defunct, called At Home. And we wrote this thing called an acceptable use policy, said this is what you can do with email. The things that we never did that we should have is control the number of messages per minute that you're sending. That's a good, why?
Please go on with the presentation.
Okay. Scan outbound messages for spam and viruses. Make sure they're sending messages using their authorized mail address. So do an LDAP check on those types of users. And if you see viruses in a message, you can tell the IP address that's going for that, controlling it with an HTTP proxy, so you can redirect people to a page that says, you've been infected. You know, here's a place where you can clean your system from that infection.
How do you recommend dealing with users who are legitimately running a mailing list and therefore can be expected to generate lots of mail?
So,
What's the question?
so the question is my first one, number of messages per minute throttling. So the other way of doing it is separate those users, and they're doing something different. You can identify that they're doing something different. You have them sign the right level of non-disclosures that they're actually doing something proper on their systems to protect themselves. Again, you're not those are the exceptions rather than the rule. You want to protect against the naive users. A lot of
Realistically,
ISP,
the answer for the ISP is charge more for people who want to run mailing lists, make them register each of their mailing lists with you.
or, you know, when I was, I guess, what is it? Not PacBell, what's it called now?
Ma
SBC,
Bell.
whatever.
That's back to being Ma Bell, literally,
Yes.
it's AT&T.
So what they do is they do port 25 controls. To get around your port 25 control, you have to call the help desk, you have to do all these other things. Once you're doing that, and you know what the hell you're doing at that point, you're the guy that's being protected. So just the process vets that individual. If they know that you're doing port 25 blocking, first of all, they know more about SMTP than the person answering the phone. So they probably know more about antivirus than the person answering the phone as well. Intellectual property leakage. People don't steal technology, whatever it is, whatever your company does. They don't steal it maliciously typically. I mean, it's just not done. It's so easy to steal intellectual property from a company. You know, USB drives are everywhere. You just put it in and walk out the door. You're not going to send it. Typically, you're not sending it an email. If you see it in email, it's typically because it's an accidental leakage. I didn't mean to send the corporate list of all the employees to my best friend, my headhunter buddy, right? That's not typically what you're doing. If you want to be malicious, there are just too many ways to get around those controls. There are companies that are actually going out and doing that. I was at RSA yesterday, and there was a company that actually controls the kind of behavior you have on your PC, runs something, doesn't let you hook up USB drives, doesn't let you do, screen captures, doesn't let you do a lot of stuff to control the way you get intellectual property leakage. If you're that paranoid,
searching you for
if you're that paranoid, you got another
USB
problem.
drives.
It's very hard to combat, as I've said, this type of behavior. If you're subject to regulatory oversight, especially if you're running a 3-level acronym kind of a company, you're doing other things to make sure, vetting your people to make sure they're not doing these kinds of things. But it's actually good to monitor the type of documents that are leaving your site. Look at keyword searches, make sure, if you're, maybe block all Excel files from leaving your site, things like that. And then quarantine and then look for acceptable use behavior around those people. Have your HR people go through, or legal people go through the quarantines and let them release it versus letting you guys be subject to the vagaries of corporate policy. So you can delegate this type of behavior to someone else in your organization, so you're not responsible for it. So a couple things to talk about regulatory controls. There are these things called FERPA and HIPAA. If you're an educational institution, you know about FERPA. If you're a health services organization, you know about HIPAA. You can't release personal identifiable information just out without encrypting it. So if you're a student, you don't want to send out student records without encrypting the student records and making sure they're going to someone who has authorization to see them. If you're subject to SEC regulatory compliance, and if you're a public company, you're doing this. I hope you're doing it. You have to archive messages from key employees, so there is actual cost associated with that. And people like at EMC are making a lot of money because you're buying lots of SAN disk arrays to archive all these messages. But look at it, and it's not only at the edge that you have to worry about that, but through the whole messaging infrastructure. So it's at your Exchange server, your Lotus server, whatever, because you have to also archive person-to-person emails as well. One of the fascinating things about regulatory compliance and regulatory controls is no one actually knows what they mean, because they're a bunch of words written on paper left up to interpretation. They're interpreted by the courts, so looking at litigation as it comes up that refers to regulatory compliance that you may be subject to is important as well, to make sure you're following the trend and make sure whatever the heck you've implemented will actually stand up in court later on. I know of no cases that have come up before the courts that deal with regulatory compliance and any of the litigation that comes up associated with that. So I still don't know what the rules really mean because no one has actually gone to court to figure that out yet. So a little bit more about where we're headed. This is about where we're at today. The buzz right now in the email community is reputation. How do you deal with the reputation of message senders? And it's not only on a global basis. So there's actually a bunch of sites that, for instance, the RBL list that capture global reputation. But it's actually also local reputation. How do you deal with your business associates? Okay, if I'm Apple Computer, how do I deal with Microsoft and messages from Microsoft? So do I quarantine it maybe? I know as our corporation, we probably should implement some of that stuff and you lose less people because you're not getting poached by your competitor. But those business relationships are important, to look at the business relationships you have in place and build some reputation around those business relationships that are in place. So you may have a relation, if you're a banking institution, how do you deal with other banking institutions? And what are the business regulations that you have between you? Do you encrypt all your traffic? Do you deal with other types of retributions that you put in front of them? If you have a bad reputation, you're looking at doing things like tar pitting, doing things like message throttling on those folks with bad reputation, or just quarantine messages, for instance, that business competitor. So, permission. Deploy effective controls on email to, and I think the last one's the most important one. That's the one that concerns me the most, is to let users maintain their trust in email. Because if you lose that trust, you lose the ability to use email as effective communication mechanism.
Okay.
That's it. Thank you very much. Questions?
So I just have sort of a comment. I know that this wasn't like a really technical talk, and I know a lot of people really like the nitty-gritty technical talks, but it's actually pretty important as system administrators to understand sort of the business aspects, because I think more and more, we're going to start finding ourselves becoming responsible. The more I become experienced in this, the more I'm seeing like these things and trends where, I don't want to end up having people, the CEO or whoever coming to me and saying, Jennifer, why didn't you realize this was going on? You're the email person. Well, nobody told me I had to filter, check things out. Just I guess 2 weeks ago, we had all this email going through. NetApp announces, it's an excellent company, by the way, we're hiring. But they said we had some great stuff going on with Decrew, and they were going to announce it the next week. And they tell the employees like all this stuff going on. Well, later that afternoon, there was this news release. NetApp is going to, and it was like, that's Decrew's press release, that's all our stuff, and they already know, and they're not supposed to know. And I was like, dang, so, how do you prevent that? And that's the kind of thing this, filtering on it works.
And you'll find that as a company becomes more understanding of what the communication that goes along with email, when you're doing that kind of release, the legal if your legal staff understands that, they come to you and say, look, we need to make sure that anything that has these words in it gets embargoed before it goes out. So it gets quarantined and they get to review it before.
It doesn't protect people from like copy pasting from Hotmail or something like that.
But then they're being malicious, okay? And it's really the accidental stuff. If they're being malicious, there's other ways to deal with those type of employees.
Like they become not employees really
Exactly.
quick.
Back.
The automation for outbound filtering will have to get very smart very quickly, because anything that involves a pair of human eyeballs is going to be a bottleneck.
You can't do artificial intelligence on your email traffic yet. But for now, that's the best tool that we have is actually going out and putting some filters in place. So, any other questions?
I have, actually, to follow up on Jennifer's point, and that is, the key word is responsible. We actually, this week, my company is being reviewed by some big muckety-muck foreign bank, and so I spent the greater part of today being grilled by their security officer, and we did cover things like email, how do you keep corporate stuff out of the email stream, and things like that. So it was, this is very appropriate, this particular discussion tonight. And it's, you as a sysadmin are going to become responsible and even legally responsible for the things that are done in your company on your servers, your network. So you have to think about things like this in a large perspective, not just from a technical side of things.
So one thing I did cover was what happens when you have law enforcement that gets involved in the company, or lawyers that get involved, and you get a subpoena for information, and they want you to produce. And what they want you to produce is every message that someone has sent to someone else, or they, in the future, can you tell me all the mail traffic that goes between these two individuals, starting from today? And in the past, a lot of our customers, what they're required to do is to keep log records for many, many, many years. I have a company that wants log records for 7 years kept, and to be able to search through those log records within 24 hours of being presented with a subpoena. And they want to know for the last, month X, 3 years ago, what are all the messages that that individual sent? And it's not just, these are the folks in Washington, the folks that are worried about terrorism and all that are really concerned when they find something out. They want to know all the mail transactions that happen.
So to solve something like that, one, a lot of the email, at least from what I've understood in the past, like backing up email, it was never like a guaranteed thing. So that's kind of one of my questions is, how do you guarantee that these do you basically say, these are all the emails we know the person sent that we have backed up? This is not all the emails.
So what a lot of what's come out is they don't want to know the individual messages. What they want to know is what the message traffic has been. So all they're asking for is what emails have they received, what emails have they sent. So we have customers that actually do, they put out terabyte sands out there just storing log information. So at a later time, they can go through that log information and tell whatever the policing authority is what has happened.
And then that information is...
To date, other than the SEC stuff, there hasn't been the requirement to actually archive email.
Well,
So
there's a critical requirement here you're leaving out, okay? And that is, in almost all the legal games out there, the important thing for anyone who isn't under explicit regulatory control, like SEC, Sarbanes-Oxley garbage, is that you can prove you haven't changed your procedures. All right, so if you can say, look, we keep email for 30 days and then it's gone, okay? And when you get served, and you get served 15 days in and they want the last 30 days worth of traffic and you've only got 5 days worth, all right, then you're up a creek, big time, okay?
Because you should have had 15 days worth.
Because you should have had that other 15 days worth that they were looking for.
Well, it's the Enron effect. What happened at Enron is that they went out and said, delete all the messages. They changed their procedures in light of the litigation that they were under. And that's where it killed them. Okay, that's where they went from just being,
So
criminals to being really bad criminals.
The other part of my question kind of was, who is responsible if it's messed up? If your technology, you thought it was backing up and it's not really backing up, who is responsible? Is it the CEO or is it me? Is it the IT
it depends.
team?
If it was
if I lose my job, okay, yeah.
If you did everything in your power to make sure that it happened correctly, and some other thing happened and it blew up in your face, you're not responsible, that you've just lost that data. Now, I'm not sure, again, this is where litigation comes into place, I'm not sure what would happen if it was, for instance, a Sarbanes-Oxley violation or SEC violation. Are you required not only to do it, but also to prove on a regular basis that it works on a regular basis?
More funds.
All that sort of stuff so far has been on case-by-case basis with no real precedents having been set, at least according to the legal groups that I've worked with.
And that's really the key. No one has gone out and litigated this stuff, so we really don't know what the case is.
It's been through litigation, right? Various people have been blamed for various things, but mostly it's been swept under the rug, or people found ways of dealing with it that haven't set precedent.
Right.
I.e., no one
They settled out of court.
high level has gone to jail.
I got a couple of quick ones. First of all, finishing up my first thought, the first one. The only 3 times I ever got viruses, they were all under Exchange, and I got them at a client site from my boss. Second thing, regarding Jennifer's comment about the press release that got nuked, there's a security statistic that says 60% of all security violations are inside jobs. Regarding this Sarbanes-Oxley nonsense, from one Sarbox auditor to another, it's not nailed down. And so one of them will tell you have to archive all your email, and another one will tell you that only the corporate officers' email have to be, and you can't get any sort of correlation between these guys. And the last one comment was, until this whole Sarbanes-Oxley nonsense blew up in our face, a lot of shops did not back up email at all. The precedent for this was that in the early 1990s, there was a very ugly lawsuit that took place. It was a very acrimonious divorce between 2 employees in a company. And there had been communications through email. So the company subpoenaed the company's entire tape backup library. On-site, off-site, everything, and the company had no access to their backups for several years while this thing got litigated out. So the company not only had to buy new media very quickly, but they had no access to their old stuff. And so the word went out, don't back up email. And I've been at a number of sites that specifically mail, and in fact any directory in your account that was called mail was excluded from the backup list. And that seemed to be true until this whole Sarbanes-Oxley bullshit
Well,
popped
for the
up.
litigation also, a lot of companies actually if you talk to the lawyers in the company, they would like to explicitly make sure that you delete messages over a certain age. So you actually don't have that, and you make that corporate policy, so you don't have the ability to go back and subpoena old records. So, you know, take advice from your legal counsel on a lot of this stuff. Back of the room.
Yeah, this isn't about that, it's about the spearfishing thing. The company I work for is mostly Windows, and they also have an authoritarian streak. So when they got spearphished, even though the mail said to click on an offsite server, pretty much anybody that doesn't do what they say gets stomped on, so everybody quickly clicked on that link and pretty much tore the entire system apart.
And
So
they learned,
that's another,
they learned a real valuable lesson to take
to
it.
consider.
We have 2 minutes.
Okay, a couple more questions.
Okay, quick question. You're talking about inspecting email as it goes through. What happens if it's going on a secure channel? You've got secure SMTP or secure POP or whatever.
Well, it depends
Or
where.
they've used S-MIME or PGP on it.
Yeah, when you,
So it depends what the
can you
policies
inspect,
of your.
can you actually see and get any useful information out of that? And what proportion of traffic is happening over secure? I mean,
Well,
are
I
people
think
sending
it-
spam over secure connections?
I have never seen spam sent in encrypted form. That's not to say that it hasn't happened. And especially using like invalid certificates to have it encrypted.
I've collected 6 pieces of spam ever. I get thousands a day that have crypto fragments in them, and that's it.
So the other comment about dealing with content inspections on signed messages, I think it would depend on what your corporate policies are. If your corporate policies are that you actually send signed messages in business transactions, then you'd let them through. Otherwise, you might actually want to think about quarantining
Of course,
those
signed and
messages.
encrypted are two different things, but.
By adding a human element to that, you've actually made it easier to peg that if that person did it, they did it deliberately, and they could be dragged into court for whatever it is that they thought they were going to get away with. The problem